Well, hello, planning policy. It's been a while since the last time we've seen one another. I hope all of you are good. We were just having a conversation about how incredible the weather changes. Yeah, so hopefully this is the beginning of a nice, long, hot summer. Tonight, I would like to call the June 20th Planning Policy Commission to order, and it currently is 6:32 p.m. Today's meeting is a hybrid meeting. The Planning Policy Commission is in person, but staff or members of the public may be attending virtually or in person. Stephen, do we have a quorum this evening?
Yes, Chair Voice, you have a quorum tonight. All absent commissioners are excused absent.
Excellent, thank you. And I'd like to note that we do have one commissioner, Commissioner Milligan, who's joining us virtually this evening. Hello, Commissioner Milligan. At this point, I would also like to welcome our newest member, Katya Zakharov. Commissioner Zakharov is joining us, filling out our alternate position. And I would like to ask Commissioner Zakharov if she'd like to say anything to the PPC.
Thank you so much for a wonderful introduction. My name is Katya Zakharov. This is my first chance to serve our wonderful city of Issaquah, and I hope I will be useful, and I hope we will have a great work time together. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Commissioner Zakharov. I'd also like to take the moment to welcome a newest member of our staff, Amanda Jackson. Hi, Amanda. Maybe if everyone will help me welcome our two newest members by just a quick round of applause. Thank you both. And we will move on to the approval of minutes, which is our first item of business to take action on. Are there any corrections to the draft March 28th minutes provided in the agenda packet? Hearing none and seeing none, those minutes are approved. Are there any corrections to the draft April 11th meeting minutes provided in the agenda packet? Hearing and seeing none, those minutes are also approved. So we will move on right now to our next item of business, which is public comment. We will hold that at this time. And Stephen, has anyone asked or signed up to make public comment?
Chair Voice, there are no in-person attendees that have signed up for public comment tonight, and there's no virtual attendees.
Okay. Get that boilerplate stuff. Now we will move on to our regular business for this evening, and we have 3 items tonight. And our first is our annual nominations and elections process, which should have probably happened back in May. But we've been absent for a minute, so we will move on, and we will start that process by electing the chair and vice chair. The process will be as first, I will call for nominations. When all nominations have been made, close the nominations. If only one nomination is made, that member is considered elected to the position by unanimous consent. If multiple nominations are made for a position, we'll hold time at our next meeting for an election process. At that point, board members will have an opportunity to discuss the nominees. We'll cast votes. And yes, board members can vote for themselves. Let's get started. Are there any nominations for the chair?
Yes, I would like to nominate Jason Voice to continue as our chair.
Is there a second? Right. Well, thank you. I appreciate it. Looking forward to being the chair. Thought last year was a pretty productive year. Again, have a lot of fun serving with all of you guys, and I appreciate the confidence you've placed. Thank you. Now we will move on to the vice chair. Are there any nominations for vice chair? Jesse.
I would like to nominate Commissioner Bader for vice chair.
I'll second that. Any other nominations? Congratulations, Vice Chair Bader.
Thank you all.
All right, well, thank you, everybody. Thank you for participating. Now we're going to move on to our rules and regulations review. And for this item, the current adopted rules and regulations were included as an attachment to this packet. This document contains the Commission's operating procedures for the meetings, taking actions, making recommendations to the city. Following the introduction of new members, the Commission takes the opportunity to review the rules and regulations for any changes proposed by staff or by the Commission. This year, staff has proposed no changes, so we would like to open the floor to any of our commissioners if they would like to see a change or make an amendment to the rules and regulations as they sit right now. If there are no proposed amendments, no action is needed. They'll just continue from last year. But if the Commission wishes to make an amendment to those rules and regs, we will have to have formal action. Are there any amendments? Hearing and seeing none. I suppose are not necessarily approved. They just continue to move on from 2023. All right. Now we'll get to the heart of the matter, which is our Phase 1 of Annual Code Update. This item is to discuss the first phase of annual updates to Title 18, the city's land use code. And I would just say before we get into it tonight, that I think the idea is to kind of have a light hand, a light touch. As far as us as commissioners, we're looking for ideas or areas of improvement. Think of language, a tweak or an addition, a subtraction, to make the language or the understanding stronger or clearer. What we're going to try and avoid this evening is, we should rethink this policy or we should change the intent of this policy. That's probably more appropriate for next week after we hear from the public, and then we will have our deliberations about whether we want to toss this, keep this. But really, we're just trying to strengthen, again, the language, the understanding, and then we'll have the opportunity next week to back and bat and forth. So I want to introduce Stephen Padua, our long-range planning manager, who will be presenting tonight. And Stephen, when you're ready, please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair Voice, and good evening, everyone. It has been a minute since we last had a conversation, and I want to appreciate the Commission's patience as we kind of work through and update our calendar here, and hopefully there won't be any other changes, and we'll be able to work through a lot of what we've planned for the work plan for the remainder of the year, and as we've presented in the Commission's calendar. Now, can everybody see my presentation okay? Okay. So tonight we're going to be discussing what is our first annual update to our code following last year's big overhaul that we conducted for the land use code. Over several years discussions, multiple levels of analysis and discussions with this commission as well as multiple boards commissions to look at updating our land use code. This year we're now taking more of a lighter touch, going through, now we've had a year of implementation of our brand new land use code. We want to propose minor amendments and slight policy adjustments or clarifications of the code as we have gone through implementation. And that is what is being proposed. So don't worry about reading all the questions that are on this page. It's very small font. I just wanted to get all the questions that are proposed or presented to you in your packet. We'll go through each of them in the presentation, and I'll re-present the questions for each proposed major amendment. One thing I should go back on is I'm not going to be going through all of the proposed amendments. We are leaving out many of the smaller clarification policy amendments, but if you do have a question on any of those other items that are in the larger matrix that was part of your packet tonight, I'm happy to go over that and we can discuss that as well. But for efficiency of time, we wanted to start with at least the major policy questions we wanted to pose for you. So with the first policy amendment, there was this section 18-204-030. This is focused on pre-applications. And as I'm going through the presentation tonight, it is in the same order of what was presented in the matrix for the policy questions. So if you want to go through the larger matrix or you just want to go through the presentation, it's up to you, but I just want to make sure it is in the same order. This particular change focused on pre-application community meetings is related to one change that we made with the code update last year with Title 18 was we introduced pre-application community meetings as a required element for level 4 review for our level 4 permits. And we made it required for level 4, but optional for level 3 and 2. And what that means is prior to a application being submitted, this meeting was required by the applicant to have for level 4 review. What we are proposing to do is remove the requirement because with a recently adopted state legislation, 5290, that particular bill was focused on review timelines for all cities. And so there's an exemption that they allow in that new state bill that if you do these 3 things, or 3 of these 9 things, you are exempted from having to refund 20% of the application fee if you don't meet the full timeline. And so that's what we're trying to do with this change, is be able to comply with that exemption so that we do not have to, we're not committed to refunding that 20% for the application fee if we don't meet the full time. So with this change, that allows us to be able to comply with that exemption. The background on this one is with 5290, I mean, the intent for the entire bill is to have all cities meet certain timelines and add more requirements behind meeting those timelines and the bigger argument for a lot of that is because of the high demand for housing, they want to make sure that housing projects do move forward. That's language that's built in the bill. And so that is kind of the background information on the bill itself. With the Title 18 update, the conversation for the pre-application meetings was that when we previously had the Rivers and Streams Board, there was discussions on making sure that we had pre-application meetings required for certain levels of project. And so when we evaluated Title 18 update and the different levels of review, we found that for the level 4 review, it made sense to have these conversations. But with the conversation with the new state bill, we are now having to re-examine that. So that is what is being proposed with this. I open to the commission for any questions or any comments.
Questions, anyone? Mr. Bader.
I have a bunch of questions on this one. I'll start with a stupid question, maybe. So the timeline starts pre-application?
The timeline starts with the submittal of the application.
Okay, so then why would a community meeting happening pre-application impact the timeline that you need to comply with?
So this is Minnie Dhaliwal. Couple of things I think that are going on. So the bill that also has a menu of options that the cities, it mandates the timelines, but it also mandates cities have to refund the money back if they don't meet that timeline. And in that refund procedures, there's a menu of options you can choose from to say, for these reasons, if the cities do these 3 things out of these 8 things, then the refund provisions don't apply, because otherwise it can become very complex. So one of those 3 options is to have pre-application as an optional item. So the other thing I think to keep in mind is from a practical standpoint of how this thing gets implemented, it becomes complicated. So even though the timelines start from the day the application come in, but applicants will see it as, well, we couldn't turn in our application because you had this requirement, and you took 6 months, the city, to schedule this meeting, hold the meeting, and all that. So from a perspective of whether that counts or doesn't count, it would be hard to argue that your timeline doesn't start from because it's a requirement. Mm-hmm. And then I think the other part to keep in mind is for level 4, it says required, but we also for level 2 and 3 have it required if there are critical areas on the property. I think the intent there is that we have those community conversations early in the process. So I think we've looked at all the moving parts, and I guess like Stephen's saying, there are 2 options for you all to consider. One of them is we just do this post. We don't require it pre. And that's how practically it's working, because we don't, generally applicants don't come and start talking to us. Some of them do, not everyone. And so they don't even know that this is a this requirement. So we get an application, and then we look at it, and then we hold a neighborhood meeting. But it happens early in the review process. So when we have 28 days to determine if it's complete or not, and within that, if there's a notice of application required, we circulate the notice to 500 feet, property owners and tenants. And in that notice, we can say, you have a meeting scheduled next week, or, within 10 days before the comment period ends, so people can come to that meeting, get their questions answered.
Yeah.
The community feedback can be folded in. I think that's sort of where we've landed as a good place, where it comply, the city, we can comply with our regulations of not having to refund it, because we can pick those 3 options out of the 8 from the bill. It's better for the applicants, because they're not really waiting for the city to schedule this meeting, and they can turn in their application. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that helps, because my follow-on question, which was kind of, I think, getting to what the policy question on the screen is would there still be a space, right, for that community feedback? Because I think that's important not to lose.
Yeah, and applicants have told me sometimes they value this, because they know what's important to the community. So before they spend their time designing this thing,
Yeah.
it's good for them to get that feedback early. So we can, for the applicants that want to do it, we can recommend and we can make it optional. But where it kind of gets tricky is where it's required.
Yeah.
And then I think if someone argued, we would have to count that time within there, because it's a requirement.
Yeah. And-
Even though it's then post.
Yeah, I guess, have these been well attended historically, especially for like the level 4 ones? Is this like a space that the community has been using that they might now lose?
We've got good attendance, yes. Depends on the project and the
Yeah.
neighborhood and what folks want to submit. I think the couple that I've attended were pretty well attended.
Commissioner Milligan.
Oh, I was just getting in line. Thank you very much. Commissioner Nina Milligan. Thank you, Commissioner Bader. I'm going to compliment what you had just said and come around the other direction in asking about, are we asking for the permission not to refund if our time permitting process is non-compliant or over time? Is that's the reason why we would not have a community pre-application conference?
This is Minnie again. Yeah, Commissioner Milligan, that is one of the reasons, but not the only one. The other one is meeting the timelines, which is more important and then, in the scheme, in terms of the triaging, because even though even though we have a requirement, it is pre-application, but applicants can submit they can turn something in, so it's hard to argue that that time is not a required time.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
I think I remember some other
Yeah.
issues about that.
Yeah.
So then, just following up a little bit then, the timeline, it seems like what was coming from the state, and I think from our hearts, was to be a better place to develop. I'm not going to put out my opinion, because you told me to hold it till next week. But the reason for getting rid of the pre-application conference doesn't seem to make the requirement, I'm wondering how that really makes it a better environment for developers, if that's what our objective is. And that's my last question.
I mean, so, I think that's where getting that feedback from the community, from the applicants, giving everyone an option to go through that process if they choose to, if they value that input early on, or having it in the first 10 days the application comes in. It's still early in the process, and at that time, a few things have been fleshed out, and, you can actually see the critical areas, you can see all those things. Perhaps is the other option there, that you would still get the feedback from everyone involved early in the design process and still comply with those other requirements. In terms of your question about make it a better environment, maybe you can help me understand what you were thinking.
Well, you know, if the purpose of SB 5920 and of our updates to Title 18 holistically was to make Issaquah a better place for good developers to come and do their work, why would this make it better if what it does is disincentivize us? It removes an incentive for us to stick to a later timeline.
From the overall time perspective, I mean,
Yeah, if it removes the incentive to do things in a timely fashion by removing the, you don't have to refund if you go over time, why does this make it better for them?
well, some of the timelines in the bill are very stringent. So, you know, scheduling a community meeting and doing that, we have to budget at least 30 days, if not more, for that process to work, because there's the mailing of the postcards, finding a time, holding the meeting, and so you know, there's a lot involved. And so for some of these projects, you would have to count that 30 days in the overall 60-day time period. So you've used up half of your time, review time, at this early stage. So that's an option we are not given under this bill, to extend the timelines and such. So we, you know, the cities are bound by that time frame. I don't know if I answered your question, but I want to make sure.
Any further questions on this particular Vice Chair Bader?
Just have a clarifying question on the alternatives. And so one is making the pre-application community meeting optional. Is the alternative to that making the post-application meeting required or optional?
Make it required. And so the trade-off there is that it would no longer be a pre-application. It would just be an early community meeting once the application is submitted. So that was the alternative we offered as part of the question. Thank you.
All right, if there's no further questions, you can go ahead and continue, please.
Great, thank you, Chair Voice. So with the next change, it was focused on the technical document requirement that's within Title 18. The reason why we are proposing to change this and is changing the requirement of the technical document submission is to allow applicants to complete a technical document review prior to the decision to pursue the project. And so that actually allows a little more flexibility for applicants to be considering whether or not it's technically feasible for them to be pursuing a project. The background with this one is within the discussion in Title 18 update last year, there was a discussion on when and where we want to allow technical documents to be submitted. And so in the old code, we didn't actually allow technical documents to be submitted within its separate process from the application process. So we built that into the code, but the way we wrote it actually didn't create as much flexibility as we were wanting. So the proposed amendments actually meet the intent that we wanted to do when we did the change last year, to allow technical document review to be done separate. Are there any questions on?
Hearing none. Doesn't look like it.
I have a question, Chair.
There it is, Commissioner Milligan.
Thank you. So Stephen, I'm sorry, you did flesh it out a little bit better for me, but I still didn't quite understand if separately, if there are any, I was wondering about interdependencies within an application. So what were the different separately parts? And it's later in the document, which I can't find right now. So help me.
Could you clarify your question? Are you asking about?
Is it all the technical documents for a particular project separately, or are there still stages which might disconnect some technical reviews that might be interdependent? There's the.
Well, the idea behind what we wanted for technical document review is that the applicants, prior to submitting a full application, could do some type of technical review process to weigh, maybe a geotechnical review for a site prior to full application and working with the staff, but not necessarily as part of a more formal process, more so than just having informal conversation with staff to see where they might fit in within the regulations. Does that help answer your question of what we mean by the technical? So it's not necessarily any specific one, but just more of that with technical documents that they would be able to have these conversations with staff early on.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. What I was thinking about was when you have a geotech report and say a critical areas report or a landslide hazard report, are all of these still getting considered together because they relate to one another? Or do you do the geotech all by itself? Is that what you mean? Do the geotech all by itself, and 3 months later you do the critical areas and you say, oh shoot, I already approved the geotech. That's what I'm thinking of.
I'm going to defer to Director Dhaliwal on this one.
Yeah, no, good question. In terms of the technical document process, the way it works, it's up to the applicants if they want to do this early. So for some, it may mean they want to know, is it a type 3 wetland or a type 2 wetland, because that then informs their site design. So they may choose to just do the critical area review for wetlands, for instance, or streams. The geotech piece is pretty technical, and so a lot of times you need to see, building plans and things like that to go with the geotech report. Sometimes it's helpful for people to know that, if there's a landslide potential, they can do borings and things like that, so that can be a separate path for them. The other flavors of this technical document review could be, parking analysis. So it's not listed as a permitted use in our zoning code. There are no parking standards, and they want to know how much do we want to park it at, so they can get some of those early decisions that inform them designing their site design. Some folks may want to do a combined, like we want to know these 3 things ahead of time, that they can do those 3 things. It's really driven with that in mind, of giving people options to know before they spend their time designing. Once we have their formal application, say a site development permit to do this development, and they've gone through a parking, they know they need to park it at 35 parking spaces or whatever, and it's a wetland 3, and they have gone through some technical review, that, there'll still be an opportunity to look at everything together. The geotech and critical area option that you're saying, sometimes those can be interrelated, but a lot of times geotechnical analysis is really focused on safety, and the critical area piece is for habitat protection and meeting our buffers. So they're not necessarily one or the other. They're looking for different things, so I'm not sure that answers your question either, but there's not a requirement to do it one way or the other currently in the code.
Chair Voice here. So the idea, Director Dhaliwal, would basically be giving the builder, the developer, I suppose, more flexibility. If they're looking at a site, they kind of have an idea what they want to do with the site, rather than submitting building designs, geotech, safety. They can start right off the bat to see feasibility by saying, okay, what type of wetland do we have here? So they can take a small piece of that technical puzzle, start that, and then, like, again, if it doesn't fit their scheme, they can walk away without incurring too much cost and time.
Correct. Yeah, and it doesn't forego, it's an optional thing. It's not a requirement that they have to do technical document review. Some folks know what they want to build, they understand the codes, and they feel confident with their ability. They don't have to go through this. This is just an additional option given to folks that we heard through our process, that we want to get some early guidance early on.
Thank you. Any further questions? Moving along.
Great, thank you. So for the next item, this is focused on the timing and development review decisions. This change is actually a direct requirement from State Bill 5290. So we don't actually have a policy question related to this one, but it is a policy change we wanted to make sure to highlight for the commission. It's not so much the clarification, so it didn't warrant being on the other list, but we want to make sure that per the RCW listed on the screen that this change is, it's referring to this RCW specifically. We want to make sure that the commission was aware of it. Are there any questions about the change required?
Not looking like it.
Okay. So I just want, this was already removed from your packet, but in case you saw this early on, this section was removed. This will be postponed to a separate date. This was related to the requirement for street walls for utility facilities. We'll have a discussion on this in the future. So I just want to make sure you read the old packet or you've been reading the old packet. We're going to talk about that in a later time. The next item is related to heat pumps and HVAC equipment being installed within required setbacks. And the change would actually allow heat pumps and AC units, which are defined as accessory structures within our code, be allowed within regulated setbacks. The reason for the change is because our current code does not allow heat pumps or AC units to be exempted from being within the regulated setbacks. And for this reason, many projects or many properties aren't allowed to install any of these units when they're fully built out to the regulated setback. So the background behind this is that being defined as an accessory structure, our code defines certain things, decks, patios, and sheds as an example, as being these accessory structures. And we allow certain exemptions of, a deck below 30 inches above the ground can be allowed within the required setback, or a shed of a certain size is allowed within that regulated setback. But when we updated the code, we didn't actually make that exemption for accessory units. And part of that is that we didn't really have as much of a demand in the previous past. So now it's becoming more evident that people need to have these installs. And for neighborhoods like Highlands and Taos, where not every property was actually built, or every building was built with AC unit or a heat pump, there's this demand now. And most of those properties within the newer neighborhoods are fully built out to what they're allowed to do. And so this is kind of where this regulation change kind of fits into why we're proposing this time. So the other part of this allowance is that there's a noise regulation that we'll be discussing. That'll be discussed also at a future date when we come back for a smaller list of code amendments. That will be, but I just wanted to make sure that the commission knows that that's kind of partnered with the other regulation. But for this one, we wanted to at least go in with allowing the installation within the regulated setbacks. Are there any questions about the proposed change?
It's not about the proposed change maybe, but maybe we should discuss the noise a little bit sooner, because it's about the time when people start using ACs and they really want to install something now.
Yeah.
Thank you.
The state regulation, thank you for reminding me of this. So the state regulates noise, and the Department of Ecology actually requires a 90-day notice for any changes to this particular type of regulation. So that's part of the reason why it's not coming at the same time as this regulation change.
I get the feeling this one might be one we hear a little bit more about next week. Is there any fine tuning, any questions other than Commissioner Zakharov's? Vice Chair Bader.
This is a little bit of a question for the sake of having a question, but I'll ask it anyway. I think you did a good job of explaining like that this is so that people can have these units in place, right? But are there, and I think the noise gets to this a little bit, like provisions in the code that would stop, and I realize you're not going to install your heat pump like on the other side of your property, but I'm saying like I don't want this right outside my master bedroom window, right? So I'm going to install it as far as I can away from my house, and now all of a sudden it's right under my neighbor's master bedroom window. Like that stop that sort of thing from happening. Because I get the point of this is just to like allow these to exist, but does this potentially open up like them being placed in weird places?
It can. You know, so a lot of development in the master plan communities, the townhomes, the attached townhomes and others, at the time they were built, this technology wasn't there. And so, you know, you can see, like in Seattle, they put them on their flat rooftop deck or whatever, right? So there's a place, even in a townhouse development, to put these up. In these units, you know, they are getting approval from the HOAs of these communities. Sometimes they're in the front yard because there's no other place for, you know, sometimes they can go on a deck of their own place. So I think we can look at adding language that says you have to do your best to keep it away from disturbing other property owners, and if there's no other alternative, then, you know, so I think the thought process that you have, I think, is probably worth exploring in terms of adding some, you know, some parameter around where to put it. But the reality is, for these attached townhomes, there isn't any room that complies with the setbacks. If you are a standalone unit and you have bare minimum side yard setbacks, most of them are putting it in their side yard because it's the closest to run the piping and everything to your home. The neighbors that might get disturbed by that noise is the potential. And I think even in the townhomes, a lot of them in a line cumulatively can become noisy at night, especially for the neighbors that don't have AC and want to open their windows. Yeah, it's a tricky one for sure. But we're hearing from the two HOAs that this is an absolutely must thing. And just so that the record is clear, we didn't change the code. The last Title 18 didn't change it. The noise code is what it was for a lot of other cities too. It's the Department of Ecology's adopted noise levels, which are 55 decibels and 45 decibels at night. None of the noise code issues changed, and nor did the setback issues. So what we used to do is to have these applicants apply for these permits online. And since we got a complaint from a neighbor about noise, we've asked them to submit a site plan that shows the location to verify that the setback. So that created a little bit of an issue. But that's why we wanted to kind of bring it forward for a good discussion and, you know, making sure we're implementing the code, keeping in mind all sides of the equation.
And I think one thing that might be helpful for next week is possibly, you know, different scenarios. Again, I think to Vice Chair Bader's point, you know, what does that look like in a front yard on the right of way? You know, is there an idea to screen these? So again, you're not looking at a large air conditioning unit. So I don't know if that's part of the thinking that's going on with staff, but that might be helpful for people to get their heads around it if we have some different menu of options to look at that. Because I think for me, like I said, the right of way, that one screams out to me. I'm thinking of all these small houses in Old Town. All of a sudden now you have these large utility edifices right there. And then again, okay, well, if that's the only place that could go and everyone should have the right to be able to put those units in, do we have a policy to screen them? You know, whether it be bushes and shrubs or that nature.
Yeah, you know, even from a noise perspective, screening becomes difficult for the heat pumps because their concept is they're drawing air in. So what a screening looks like for a heat pump would also need to be, you know, you can't put an acoustic barrier to keep the noise down because you're trying to pull in air. So we talked to the installers and everyone else to kind of see what kind of, you know, dampeners and things like that could be, because the noise making is the fan piece. But yeah, we can look at options for you all for.
And it's not even so much the noise, because again, a lot of these units are working Department of Ecology.
Yeah.
It's more of the aesthetic, right?
Okay.
When they're walking by, and to see the side of the house, that setback, not as big of a concern, I guess, person below that primary bedroom. But otherwise, like I said, I'm thinking of all these charming little houses in Old Town, and all of a sudden you start having, because again, these houses are older, and you start upgrading systems and start putting them in the front yard.
Yeah, yeah, certainly, you know, we'll look at and provide you some options, pros and cons. And if a property has an opportunity to put it in a side yard or backyard, they have to exhaust that before a front yard option is put in, or something like that.
Thank you, Director Dhaliwal. Commissioner Milligan.
Okay, so thank you, our new commissioner, Katia, and Vice Chair Bader and Jason. I would +1 to all of those. And I had also, while I was thinking along those lines and most concerned about the noise, sure, we can put in this noise ordinance, but an ordinance is only as good as the one that you can enforce. And because of what Dhaliwal said, there are people who complain about the noise, even if there is an ordinance. So the ordinance doesn't mean that they'll be quiet. But in addition to that, I wanted to explore and ask Stephen about the reason for a setback. And if the reason for a setback is access through property, or a safety thing, or so I can get a fire hose back there, or a team of fire people, or for whatever, or to to keep out of the space between homes things that might be a risk for an adjacent home, to protect a neighbor, is that what a setback's for? And so if we allow things in a setback, how does that defeat the purpose of the setback? And we're talking about heat pumps right now. Well, if heat pumps are there, and I'm sorry, so I want to ask, what's the purpose of a setback, and how does this perhaps impinge upon the purpose? And then the other is there some reason for me to think that everybody has to have a heat pump? Like there aren't alternatives for the people who don't have the extra space to install something outside their home? So those are my 2 questions.
Sure, I can try and answer those, Commissioner Milligan. So your first one is safety requirement. What's the purpose of the 5-foot setback? You're absolutely right. It is the fire separation generally. And so some of those setbacks come from fire code, but you can, build the walls to have fire protective measures and things like that. So we did reach out to fire department to ask if they, that we're hearing a lot from our community members about the need for these heat pumps. Climate change is here, summers are hotter. There's a lot of federal rebates on these heat pumps, so they're becoming more popular. And if they had any concerns of allowing these in the side yard setbacks, and they have come back and said that is fine. They don't have too much of a heartburn over allowing these in the side yard setback. So we did check with the fire department on that. Your other question, I think, was, are there other alternatives? We've explored that as well. Our building official looked at, can you mount these on the windows and on the side of the building? Perhaps there are some units that come like that, but I think we heard a very strong opinion from HOAs of the master plan community, stating that is not allowed under their rules, because you're attaching it to siding, and that could lead to putting stuff on the siding is not desirable, because long term that could
Yeah,
create
what I
problems.
was really thinking is, what did people do in the olden days before heat pumps? I think they had central heating and cooling, or they had the infrastructure for their home installed inside the home. Maybe ridiculous, but let's say I don't have that much room and I want another hot water heater to heat up my hot tub, and I think I'm going to put that in the setback. These things don't have to be in the setback. That's what I was getting at. What other devices could satisfy the community's need for, and I think we're talking about cooling here, because you were talking about climate impacts, and people aren't saying, oh, I'm upset that my heater doesn't work so well. They're saying it's because my cooling. And what other cooling devices? If the federal government is driving the demand for these externally installed devices, maybe the solution isn't say, okay, let's just have them, but to find an internally installed device and get a federal rebate for that. Anyway, I wasn't supposed to have an opinion today. Sorry, Chair.
That's okay, Commissioner Milligan. We like opinions. We just don't want to get too much into the back and forth. But I think that was perfectly acceptable. No problem at all. Are there any other questions, concerns about this particular amendment? All right.
Just so we're clear, you guys want us to come back with some options? So can we summarize what would you like us to be back with?
Sure. For myself, again, aesthetics, I think for Commissioner Milligan, again, safety explanations of how these work. I know I just briefly explained it. If I'm missing something, feel free to chime in. And then I'm even, Director Dhaliwal, you had mentioned that, primarily if you were to put this unit in, ultimately the city would guide them, let's try it back here, but if you absolutely had to put it here, that's kind of what I'm interested in hearing.
Yeah, the last preferred option to least desired option.
Right. And then again, obviously the safety concerns Commissioner Milligan brought up. Some of those units are pretty big, and some of them can get, once they start whirring, get pretty loud. And again, I can understand the HOAs, a lot of the siding, those areas are actually common spaces, right? They belong to the HOA, not necessarily the owner themselves, right? Studs in type thing. So yeah, I can see how those type of units and windows would not be.
Yeah. Aesthetics only if it's in the front yard is what you all are interested in, right?
That's what I'm interested in, but
Yeah.
again, I defer.
Okay.
And I
That
think
was-
the other comment we heard from Vice Chair Bader was the language around making sure someone doesn't install the heat pump closer to their neighbor's master building or master bedroom window versus closer to the primary structure.
So
Yeah, like
reduce-
mitigating impacts on
Yeah.
neighbors.
That can sour relations quickly.
Yeah, Chair, I think Vice Chair Bader meant that as an example of the most egregious, but your living room, your whatever, if it's next to your neighbor's house, which that's, I think, what she was saying. What if it's next to their back porch and they want to have a barbecue out there and it's noisy?
Correct. I
Yeah.
was just using the same example, but yeah, we'll look at language on trying to minimize that impacts on neighbors for installation.
Great, thank you.
All right, thank you. For the next change, we're proposing a change to in the lighting code specifically for the allowance of stadium lighting to exceed the minimum requirements for with a lighting study. And the reason for this change is that through implementation, we worked with applicants to look at what manufacturers are actually offering. And for stadium lighting specifically, they don't actually construct these devices within the required limits, lighting limits that we've set in the code. And so that is the reason why we're actually proposing the change specifically for stadium lighting. The background information on how the code came to be, particularly for lighting, is when we had the discussions for the Title 18 update, there was, we were making a push for accommodating dark sky initiative. And so that's what a lot of the recommendations went into, or the changes went into based on the recommendations on the dark sky initiatives. And so, but looking at the current market, there isn't actually any stadium lighting that would meet the requirements that we have set in code. So that is the reason for the proposed change. Are there any questions?
Doesn't appear to be. Up, Commissioner Milligan.
And if we don't ask a question, it makes it seem like we don't care. Okay, so if we cared about dark sky and there wasn't a light that lit a field, a play field or a sports park dim enough to comply with the dark sky, we decide to go with the lighted sports field. I'm trying to ask, is this what we're doing rather than saying we want to comply with dark sky standards and we're going to seek a solution for our play fields that complies with dark sky?
No.
The choice seems to be a little disconnected, and I don't quite understand why we would go away from our objective in order to buy a product. But anyway, to help me understand this.
Yeah, no, it is a great question. Specifically for the change we're proposing, you're correct. It's trying to accommodate what the market is available for these type of devices. But with the added language of requiring a lighting study, they would actually be looking at the impacts of the lighting on the surrounding areas and propose recommended mitigations for the impact. So that is part of the reason why that language was also added into the exemption for stadium lighting.
Okay, I'm sorry, so the mitigations, might that be shielding, direction of light? What are
Yes.
the height of the standard? Could the standards be lower because that's the only way you can get the dark sky standard?
Yes.
Oh. Well, that would be interesting to see that at the same time rather than seeing this isolated. So maybe as a follow-up to understand what the mitigating factors are that accompany this at the same time.
You know, what I can add to that, Commissioner Milligan, is I think the issue is hardwiring a standard that the market doesn't deliver. But the lighting levels and regulations and other things can be met with other alternatives already in the code, is my understanding. So this was just a hardwired, thing that was put in the code, but there are other ways to achieve that same objective that of dark skies. Because this standard is not even available in the market, we can, nobody's is manufacturing it for anyone to buy it from. So it doesn't make sense to include a standard.
Okay. So the simplest part of my question, I'll see if I can rephrase to make it really simple. Will we still meet our dark sky standard if we allow the stadium lighting to exceed the minimum CRI?
That is my understanding. We can confirm that for the next meeting.
That'd be great. Thank you. That's what I want to know. All right. Thank you.
Vice Chair Bader.
Yeah, I have a follow-up question to that. So the kind of addition to the code that says minimums are not required for stadium lighting when supported by lighting studies prepared by a qualified professional, that reads a little bit as like it can be anything as long as it has a lighting study. I wonder if language can be added to that is like, that gets us to the point where we're meeting the dark sky standards or something like that, just to kind of strengthen that language in the code. And then my second question is that if it can't meet that minimum of 80, like, is there a number? I don't like using numbers that like mean nothing to me, but like, is there a unit that like we wouldn't want that stadium lighting to ever go above, or is that like, you know what I mean?
We can look into both of that and pose something for the next meeting.
Chair Voice, just a quick question. Are manufacturers even looking at bringing that down, or the devices, they're just not created that way? It'd be too expensive to create it. Is it just something that hasn't come online yet?
Our understanding is it for the type of lighting and it is for stadium lighting, it doesn't make sense for them to manufacture it that way. It doesn't meet the purpose of what they're trying to do with stadium lighting.
That makes perfect. But the idea is, yeah, there's nothing coming down the line that would make our code try to be a little bit more nuanced, because again, there's no plan. Those type of devices just simply aren't built that way.
Correct.
Any other further questions? Moving along.
Thank you. So for the next change, it's specific to the monument sign prohibition or monument sign requirements. And we're proposing to add a clarification when monument signs are allowed or prohibited. The current code actually isn't clear enough for us to indicate when a new monument sign is prohibited or required. And so that is what our changes are kind of aiming towards. When we can, even before we did the Title 18 update approved last year, there was a sign code update several years prior to that, and that's where the language originated. It was in the discussion for that project update for the sign code is for focusing on monument signage and when we want that to be allowed or to be able to make change. And so should the city make the change to the requirements for this monument signage, specifically where prohibited and where current signs may be modified or removed. I changed up my question. I realized there was a typo with the questions, which is why that's crossed out in the Any questions on this change?
Vice Chair Bader?
Sarah did her homework. What's a monument sign?
So, we can look up the definition, but it's basically a standalone thing that you see at a, not on the, attached to the building, but like a pedestal, it has a pedestal, and you just see it as a standalone freestanding sign, basically. Yeah.
Like at the entrance to a neighborhood where it says like the name of the
Yes,
neighborhood, that sort of thing?
yes,
Okay.
yeah. And for businesses, it's something they put along the street
Yeah,
corner,
yeah.
not attached to the
Right.
building. Yeah.
Any follow-up? Just a quick question. What's going on with the triple X sign? Is Burger Master going to take that down?
What's in your list to
Okay.
fix?
That's a landmark sign, so, and everyone ready for the next. All right, please, continue.
Thank you. So landmark signs. So with landmark signs, we're proposing to change the language around when a landmark sign designation how a landmark sign designation is maintained over time. And so the current criteria for landmark sign designation is fairly stringent in working with a certain applicant. We have learned that there is, with how stringent the criteria is for maintaining the designation, actually disincentivizing establishing the landmark sign designation because it makes it more difficult to make any changes. And so that is part of the reason for this code amendment is specifically on trying to meet the original intent of why we wanted the landmark sign designation.
Any questions? But rusty here. It's been 2 months. But having said that, I do want to know what's going on with it. Does anybody have any inside baseball? I know they're turning that into a Burger Master.
So with Burger Master, they are wanting to keep the sign. And so that's part of the discussion of establishing the big XXX sign as a landmark designation. But part of the issue is that the way the criteria is set for maintaining the designation is that they can't change it, essentially. And that doesn't match with what Burger Master wants to do. They want to be named Burger Master and not maintain the same sign that's there now. And so we want to allow a little more flexibility of establishing the landmark sign, but still keeping a little bit of criteria of what exactly you want to keep for the landmark designation over time.
Hungry. Okay. Thank you, Stephen. Commissioner Milligan.
Thank you so much. This is interesting to me. I don't have a strong opinion, but I want to know if this particular question could be asked of another commission. You know, I'm thinking of, do we have a Historic Preservation Commission? Do we have the Arts Commission? Some others that have to do with the reason why we would have landmarked it in the first place. What other review might this code update go through for feedback?
So part of the code language for landmark signs is actually, there's a separate criteria specifically for establishing the designation for landmark signs. So it has to meet certain historical aspects for the signage. It has to be a certain importance, certain level of importance for the community. And so there is separate designation criteria for establishing a sign. What we're proposing to change is primarily just how do you maintain that designation over time? And how does that make sense? To answer your question, is there another board or commission we can consult with? Yes, but at the same time with where this code lies and in terms of responsibilities for boards and commissions, that's primarily for the Planning Policy Commission. The discussion on establishing the landmark sign designation wasn't necessarily something that was important to the Arts Commission previously when we updated codes on this language with Title 18 or the Title 18 overhaul, but that is something that we can consider. It just postpones when we're able to make this change.
Yeah, and if I may add to that, to what Stephen's saying, this is not a heavily used provision in the code. I mean, we could do a lot of outreach and get feedback from various entities. One of the criteria is it has to be in existence for 40 years. The lifespan of most signs, it doesn't meet that much. And so cities that have done, where they want all non-conforming signs to be brought into compliance because they're trying to declutter and, kind of create a vision, generally it's like a 10-year amortization period for signs because they think businesses change and other things that, that's the lifespan. So, for someone to qualify to apply for a designation, they have to be, it has to be assigned for 40 years. So it's not going to be a whole lot of locations in Issaquah that would probably meet that test, in addition to all the other criteria that are already in the code. The issue was really once you go through a process of getting it designated, like Stephen said, what are you allowed to change? I mean, nobody's going to go through that whole elaborate process if they can't put their name on it. And so within some boundaries of what that change could look like, because nothing's static, at some point it will have to kind of morph into, but it is important to the community. I mean, it's a landmark in the sense that community members relate to it and they keep, consider it as something that they have, value for the community. That's sort of the thought process there.
Commissioner Patterson.
I guess one just piece of feedback looking at what was proposed in the packet for this change is I'm wondering if it maybe goes too far in the wide open direction, maybe a little too relaxed. Obviously, the Triple X Burger sign being, I think, probably the most iconic in our town in terms of what comes to mind. But right now, it looks like we're dialing it back to just size and shape. I understand, a new tenant may want to update a name, something like that. But, if we don't have any guidance around the aesthetic of it, like all of a sudden now instead of a root beer barrel, it becomes a gigantic burger or something that might be a little bit more shocking.
I was thinking of a steer, right? Big
Yeah,
one.
yeah. Maybe something that, to your point, it's a landmark because it's been here for 40 plus years and it's iconic because of what it is, not, because it's something that will change. So maybe there's a middle ground there that we can find that at least addresses the aesthetic piece a little bit too, not, just size and shape.
Yeah, no, that's a great point, and we can take a look at some additional language for the public hearing.
Great, thank you, Commissioner Patterson. Any other questions about landmark sign? All right, Stephen.
Okay, moving on. For the next change, we're proposing a removal requirement for the Community Planning and Development Department for tracking tree removal for public projects. The part of the reason for this is that through implementation of the code and tracking of tree removals, we've realized that our Parks and Public Works departments are already tracking these tree removals and with public projects. And so this was a big discussion piece for a Title 18 update when we were looking at updating the tree code within that bigger overhaul. And the ideal was that we wanted to make sure that tree removal being trees being a very important aspect of this community, removal is a big concern. And so we wanted to make sure that we were being able to track any type of removals with any projects. And so that is something that we find important, but at the same time, with this change, we're reducing that redundancy. There is no point with the Community Planning and Development Department to track this tree removal if the other departments are already doing that. So that is the reason for this change.
Any follow-up questions for Stephen? Commissioner Patterson.
Apologies if I missed this part, but is it a requirement for the other department to track it, or are they just doing it?
Currently, I don't believe it is a requirement for them, but they do it because it has always been a concern and question for this community as anytime a tree gets removed with any project, private or public.
Sure, I can add a little bit to that. Parks Department and Public Works coordinate on, as part of last time we did the Title 18 update, one of the recommendations that went to City Council as part of that was creating an urban forestry program. So now we have an urban forester on staff that is leading some of that effort in terms of, at some point, the city will have an inventory of all the city-owned trees and things like that once, that's up and running. So there is some accountability for figuring out how many trees Parks Department plants. They maintain a SharePoint list of all the things, and, and he's sharing that with Public Works. So there's already some sort of accounting. The city also has this, a lot of effort is being put into asset management program where, all the assets that the city owns are sort of tracked and maintained. This seemed like an over the top of, creating a process that wasn't going to result in anything efficient for the city. So,
Commissioner Zakharoff.
Thank you. So can some sort of agreement be reached between, let's say, the Planning Commission and the Parks Commission? So somebody has this requirement is, before we remove this requirement to track, remove trees. So we're not getting into the situation when we're not counting, they're not counting. I mean, they're counting just because they do it, but they stop doing this and everybody stops doing this, and at the end, no one is responsible. Thank you.
I would say part of the discussion with the Parks Board and the Urban Forestry Management Plan is that tracking trees, whether it's existing or it's going for removal, is an important aspect of those discussions with the Parks Board, even though it's not built into the code that they're required to do it. That's part of the reason why they are already doing it, even without the we can wait for that, but at the same time, it's not, I don't think that based on the discussions for the development of the Urban Forestry Management Plan that they're going to be stopping tracking and the tree removal any soon, just because of the importance of.
Commissioner Milligan.
Thank you. And thank you, Commissioner Patterson and Zakharoff, for your comments. I want to amplify Commissioner Patterson's a little bit. We're talking here about tracking, and I'm sorry, I'm not quite getting it either. Did either of these organizations or agencies limit and regulate the tree removal besides just county tree removal? That's my first question. And then the other question is, how do we address the concern that I've heard in our community over, several incidences of people or circumstances where trees are removed? You can only remove so many trees, and so they remove so many trees, and then the next week they remove so many trees, and the next week I'm saying week, but I mean it could be month. Next thing you know, all the trees are gone, even though there would have been a limit to how many trees you could remove, except that people did it in a piecemeal way. So are we able to manage that, and are either of these bodies limiting the amount of tree removal, not just tracking?
I could get started on the first part of your question in terms of the tree regulations within Title 18 actually does provide limits on tree removal. And so that is something that capital projects still have to follow that. The other part of your question, I'm going to defer to Director Dhaliwal on.
So, there's not a tree permit requirement. So there was just this reporting requirement. So there are exemptions for stuff in the public right of way and others. I think if that's what your question was, Commissioner Milligan. And the other one is, are they, it costs the city money to remove trees and all that. So it's not that they want, that additional trees are being removed. They are only removed when either they're diseased, dying, or there's a capital project to do something, in which, there's public outreach and community outreach associated with capital programs that feeds into whether there should be a sidewalk added, and which could result in X number of trees to come down, or whatever the case may be. I think that process is set up for capital projects where those discussions can occur with the community. But what was your, the second part, did I answer your question?
Well, I think you did, except that, the concern of if we do limit the number, and I'm expecting our city to do what we require of citizens and to hold ourselves accountable in a similar way and not have a more lenient rule for capital projects. But the accumulation of tree removal because it gets tracked in a piecemeal way. And that's just, if you hadn't heard of this way of getting rid of all your trees, then let me work on it a little bit and I'll come back next week.
Okay, so you all are looking for some sort of reporting back to some commission or board, whether it's parks or,
No, I'm looking for how do we, if we have a tree canopy requirement, how do we meet that objective? Do we meet that objective by limiting the number of trees that are removed? And if the only way you can limit the number of trees that are removed is by tracking the tree removal, I'm kind of going back to Commissioner Patterson's, and Stephen sort of answered that question. So I think I'm part of the way there. So I'm good for now. Thank you.
I guess since they were called out by name, I'll ask if Commissioner Zakharoff or Commissioner Patterson have any follow-up. Okay, thank you.
All right, moving on to, I think, our last two changes. This first one is within actually the Title III of the Municipal Code, not within the land use regulations, but it's something that the Community Planning and Development Department actually works with very regularly as part of permit review process. And this one is specific to language within our traffic impact fees and an exemption that we allow for change of use. And so the proposed change ensures that the fees are assessed in a consistent manner. The current language does not match the exemption that we updated for the fire impact fees. And so we wanted to make that change to make sure they're consistent. The specific change itself is that when there's a change of use for a certain site, that we are exempting them from the traffic impact fees if it's the change of use within a certain time frame. And so that's not consistent with what we allow for fire impact fees. One thing I want to note, because it's within Title III, this isn't something that will be noted for a discussion as part of the public hearing, but we still wanted to get commission feedback before moving forward with consistency change. Are there any questions?
Floor is open. Vice Chair Bader.
Yeah, I have no issue with this in theory. I think the language that's included feels like it leaves a little bit up to interpretation of just less impact. Is there a way to better define less impact?
Yeah, we can take a look at that.
Commissioner Patterson.
Thank you. My question was just if you could provide an example of that change of use scenario that would apply to.
Let's say we have a commercial property that was vacated, and then it became a residential property. The way the language is written now is that if that change of use happens within a certain time frame, they would actually be exempted from traffic impact fees, even though it is a complete change of use. And so that is part of the reason why we're making sure the language.
Any other question? Commissioner Milligan.
Not about this one, but just another couple spots in our packet. So when we get to that part, call on me.
Yeah, we'll do an overview at the very end. I just wanted Stephen to be able to get through his presentation, and then we'll go through the whole thing. Stephen, last one.
So for the last one, it's a similar issue with the traffic impact fees, but for the park impact fees section. And we can, again, take a look at less impact and picking the language around that. Are there any questions about the change for the park impact?
Doesn't appear to be. Okay. So I did want to offer the commission an opportunity. Again, you guys just, was a lot to digest. And again, as I'm sure for Stephen and Minnie, who give a lot of presentations, nice to get through it without completely being stopped, because then you lose your train of thought. So now I do want to open the floor for anything that you've heard in the last hour, in some minutes, to be able to ask, share concerns. Again, hopefully I wasn't stifling debate. That definitely wasn't my purpose. I was just trying to drive it more towards next week when we have a public hearing and the public is involved, because they're going to give us their input, right? We'll get pretty much the same type of presentation. The public will then have a chance to weigh in. And after those concerns are met, then we really get to deliberate and kick the ball back and forth, argue with one another, agree with one another. All of that stuff gets to happen next week. But again, if you do have concerns, I'd like you to voice them. Just as someone who does give presentations, it's so hard when they keep getting cut up. So, all right. Would anybody like to add anything? Questions, concerns, anything at all to what we've just heard? Commissioner Kennedy, please.
I'm quiet this evening. I have, in traditional, my style, I guess, I have a really odd one. 18.204.070, application completeness. Notify applicant via mail, electronic mail, or equivalent means of electronic communication. Great to put in that option. Do they have the opportunity to say what equivalent means of electronic communication are used? So I would see it as, we're gonna snail mail you, email you, or maybe text you. And do they get to say, yes, that's how I want to learn of this? How does the equivalent means of electronic communication part work?
So with the notifications that all properties within 500 feet need to be notified of, or provide notice of whatever is the electronic communications. Are you asking if the applicant gets to choose, or if property owners get to choose?
I guess the applicant, like, how do they know? How does anyone know that it's been sent out? Like, I'm supposed to expect this via email, or if it's another means of electronic communication, I'm thinking text. Are they gonna do that? That's, I don't.
I mean, through the city's notification systems, we have the listservs that people requested to be part of, and so they know that they're getting notices for that, and that's part of some of our notification systems. Beyond that, it's whichever electronic notification systems get set up for either the project or that the city might set up.
Okay, I think, well, this serve is usually an email. I'm trying to picture what other electronic notifications.
It's hard to say in the future what kind of technology might be available, but beyond emails and even social media, there's not much other options out there for electronic.
Right. So I like the flexibility. I just want to make sure people knew, there was enough clarity that people knew.
And because of, I would say, changing technology, that's why part of the reason why we kept it a little bit broader rather than saying specifically emails or even. And that's changing it.
Commissioner Milligan.
Wow, Commissioner Kennedy, I forgot that had caused a pause for me too. I think because it triggers the completeness requirement, that to not be specific could lead to a challenge at some point on what is deemed an effective electronic communication. And so I think I join Commissioner Kennedy in asking y'all to look that over again. But that wasn't my question. I had two other questions from the packet. One had to do with building height. So this is section 18.404.050, building height, underform and intensity. And there's a new section called D, determining average grade. And this looks like an addition, not a replacement. And I have to tell you, I don't understand what I'm reading here, but what I wanted to ask was, does this continue the spirit at which we spend quite a bit of time on building height, not just with the Title 18, but before that, on managing how high buildings are? I think the concern was buildings get too high because of where you determine your building height. So because this is complicated and I don't quite understand it, does this in any way get in the way of us controlling building height because somebody could measure it a particular way and make a building even higher? Did that make sense?
Just to be clear, I understand your question. So the methodology laid out in here, could that be manipulated to create a taller building is sort of what you're wondering?
That's right.
Okay. So I think what this does is sets the framework for how to measure it, because average grade, I think, is the language that's written in the code, but it's not really clear how do you determine your average grade. You can take your highest and your lowest point and just do the midpoint of that. But what this lays out is that you have to calculate your grade points all along the perimeter of your building, so that you don't get to manipulate it too much in terms of what your average grade is, that you're looking at all sides of the building.
Right. Okay. Here's the word that triggered me, I think, was proposed topography. And say that this had a shoring wall or something in the proposed topography. Does this allow the average grade to be higher than it was before section D?
Yeah, my understanding is you take a look at the existing grade, not your finished grade. So it's the average of the existing grade, because what you don't want is someone, artificially elevating your finished grade. But we'll take a look at what you're saying, proposed topography. That doesn't sound right. We'll take a look at it.
Yeah. Look at that again. That'd be awesome. Okay. And then the next one was looking at 18, after that in the packet, 18.508030, which up in the table is about the HVACs going in the setbacks. And then in here, the way this is written is that it removes a line that says amenities must be set back 5 feet from the property line. This doesn't seem as specific a change as what we were talking about before, which was, should we allow people to put HVAC in the setback? Are these really the same? Page something. I don't even know page.
You're referring to the language specific to heat pumps or the language for the decks?
Well, all we talked about was heat pumps, but when you look at the edit to the code language, it's just removing line number 4. That's one of the things.
The amenities, I think that the heat pumps were called amenities, not structure. I think there's a line being deleted related to amenities. Is that?
So what else besides heat pumps are amenities that now would not have to be 5 feet from the property line?
Yeah, I think that particular section earlier kind of defines things like heat pump and this. Let me find it.
Director Dwell is correct. There's accessory structures are defined earlier in that section of code for 030.
Yeah, but where are amenities defined? That's the one that I didn't know. Amenities.
What's that section of the code?
508.
We can follow up with that. Let's just put that as a question. You can come back. Be part of the thing. And that's my last question. Thank you, Chair.
They're hunting it down.
Yeah, I think on, in that 508030A2, it's talking about permanent amenities such as mechanical equipments which include but are not limited to AC units, air compressors, and heat pumps. That's what it defines. So mostly HVAC type of equipment.
Yeah, but not limited to. It's a very
Correct.
interesting.
But the decks, porches, patios, ramps, and all of those are minor elements, so that's not an amenity. Yeah.
Those are different. Yeah. Thank you.
Any further questions? All right, and I did want to give the commission also an opportunity. I know we didn't talk about the minor amendments, but if anyone has any questions or concerns about the minor amendments, which are pretty limited, some of this stuff being driven by just simply updates and things. But if anyone does have any questions for those minor amendments that we kind of skipped over, please feel free. And obviously next week we'll have some time for clarifying questions as well. So we're not completely done questioning staff, but I think for this part of it, we can now officially move on. All right. Stephen, do you have everything you need?
I do. Thank you, Chair Voice. Thank you, Commissioners.
Okay. The next item on the agenda is reports. So we'll start with any city council updates that staff would like to share with us.
Sure. So on June 10th, we went to council to share with them some of the recommendations that we had from our national consulting firm for permit process improvements. So as you know, House Bill 5290 and other administrative priorities about streamlining and making our process more effective. We had gone to council a couple of times before that, and then one of the items was to take a look at it more comprehensively. So we did a request for qualifications for consultants to come help us evaluate our process. And through that process, we selected Ref Telus, which is a national consulting firm. And they worked with staff to map out our existing processes and interviewing them and our internal customers that we, review capital projects for. Parks and Public Works and Economic Development, and then they also talk to our applicants. So through that work, then they submitted a report that outlined some recommendations of things that they heard, saw, and based on their evaluation of best practices, we should take into consideration. So we have 12 recommendations. We're happy to share the report if anyone's interested and into the details. But things like better completeness items, that'll help all the subsequent steps be more clear. Then we have the way we communicate with our applicants about the next steps. So a lot of times applicants would get the marked up copies and the plans, but they weren't really sure what the next steps would be. So we'll be working through all those recommendations to implement for the rest of the year. So that's been what we've been busy, and with the council update. I think that's it. Some of the upcoming meetings with council committee are on Lakeside Development Project. We're going to be taking a transfer of development rights as part of the development agreement project item that has come in. I think that's what and then of course comprehensive plan, that all your work is going to move up through that process, and missing middle will start. Yep.
That's great, busy city. If there's no further city council updates, we'll ask if there's any other businesses or announcements from staff.
Just one quick announcement of, since our last meeting, it's been a while, we've updated the commission's calendar, and so it's updated to be consistent with several of the project schedule updates that we've had. So it should be pretty much set for the rest of this year. There's still going to be some potential cancellation because of conflicts with holidays, and those will be kind of to be determined if there's needed to be rescheduling a special meeting. But our intent is consider those canceled unless there is a need potentially either for city council or as our general work plan needing to have an additional meeting.
Great. Yeah, we're talking to Stephen earlier. Looks like there's a lot of 101 introduction to class. So that should be fun. All right. Anything for the good of the order, the good of the commission? Commissioner Milligan.
You're exemplifying the reason I wanted you to call on me. I want to thank you all for allowing me to participate fully in the hybrid. Even my kitty is participating. You can hear her. Thank you, Chair Boyce, and thank you, Planning Manager Padua and Director Dhaliwal for just making this format work so well and for engaging me fully. I encourage other people who want to come before the commission that it really works. You can come from home.
We'd prefer to see
Thank
you
you.
here, but yes, you can come from home.
Yeah.
Thank you, Commissioner Milligan. I guess to close it out, it's great to see everyone again. It's great to see Director Dhaliwal. Again, a warm welcome to Amanda Jackson on staff, to Commissioner Katya Zakharov. Looking forward to working with all of you this summer. It's always the nicest day of the year that we seem to kick these things off again. I don't know why that is. The commissioner gods seem to smile on it. I do want to say thank you again for electing me as your chair for this upcoming year. I'll take it seriously. We do meet behind the scenes to hopefully make these meetings run efficiently, not waste anybody's time, but also to make sure that everybody gets a fair hearing. So thank you for that. One last time. Anybody else? Okay. There being no further business before the commission, we will adjourn this meeting at 8:04 p.m.